بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك وكرم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. Session 2 is going to be a little bit of a light session. And I think just to right before food, right? Heavy sessions is like start looking at the clock. Man, when's this guy going to stop talking? Right? Especially when we can start smelling the food. Oh man, yeah, it's over. So the Arabs, I was telling our brother Justin yesterday, the Arabs have an expression: إذا جاء الأكل زال العقل. Right? When food comes, the mind goes. Right? إذا جاء النفقة غم الورقة. When the provision comes, you should put away the books. Right? So we're going to try to implement that and follow that here, inshallah. Bismillah. So we alluded to in the beginning and also last night a little bit more so, but for those who just came today, you're not going to miss anything. We're going to kind of repeat those sentiments from yesterday. So what we want to do today, so session 1 was kind of just laying down the framework, laying down the foundation so that we can understand some of the terms that are going to come up in the next couple sessions so that we can go into this with a little bit more understanding. But really the main idea of today is to go through one of the prophetic narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, called the Hadith of Gabriel. Right? And Gabriel is one of the 4 main angels that are mentioned in the Quran. There's 10 mentioned by name throughout the Quran and Hadith, technically more. But he is the greatest of all the angels, is the angel Gabriel. Right? And we said one of his names is Ruh al-Qudus, the Holy Spirit. Right? That he is he's one of the greatest of the angels of God, one of the greatest beings that God has ever created. So this is the hadith of Gabriel because he is the main character. But the scholars know this hadith, right? If you just said hadith Gabriel, right? Everyone knows what you're talking about, but they also have another name for it called Sunnah. Sunnah and in Arabic literally means a path. But when we say the Sunnah, we say the Quran and the Sunnah. Right? The Sunnah refers to the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Which is the result of looking at all of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and deriving what we should do. Right? And that's the Sunnah. What was his consistent practice daily? What did he do? How did he live? That's the Sunnah. Right? So this hadith is known as Sunnah, right? Literally the mother of the Sunnah. But the word mother in Arabic also has the meaning of to be the source of something. Right? All of us, right? 3 of us here, we all have the same source, the same mother. Right? Me and my sisters specifically. All of us essentially are just like third cousins, fourth cousins, right? We all go back to Adam and Eve. So the mother is the right? And is the source of something. And the Quran mentions that Mecca is Ummul Qura. It's the mother of all cities. So this is known as Sunnah. Why? Because it comprises everything of the whole religion in one place. Right? And we've been alluding to some of that already. So some of this is going to be a little bit of a repetition. But we're going to first start by just reading the whole hadith. So I tried to break them up in different slides, so you don't have like a 0.5 font and everyone's squinting at the TV. So I broke it up into different slides regarding the different sections of the hadith. Right? So these are all broken in specific sections. And then we're going to talk about in the end what to take from this hadith in a general sense. And then the next few sessions are going to talk about specific parts of this hadith. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The chain of transmission here begins with the companion Umar ibn al-Khattab. It's not mentioned. It's not in here. So Umar ibn al-Khattab was one of the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ. He actually was one of the greatest enemies of the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning of the prophetic biography. And he left his house with his sword unsheathed, walking directly for the house of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, intending to kill him. Right? But on his way, someone stopped him and said, "Did you know that your sister is Muslim?" And he said, "You should settle your own household first before you try to attack someone else." So he went to his sister, and he found that she was reading the Quran in secret, because this is in the early days. They were being accosted and oppressed for being Muslims. So she quickly hid the manuscript or the paper, the parchment that she was reading under the pillow, right? And Umar barges in the door, and he's known to be very, very huge person. That when he would sit on a horse, right, his feet nearly touched the ground. Right, that's a very big person. It's like Andre the Giant kind of stuff there. So he barges in the door. Imagine how scary that is. Right? Even though he's your brother, my man is angry. So he barges in. He's like, "What was that you were reading?" She's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." Right? So he ends up getting really mad and slapping her. Right? And once he sees like the blood trickling down his sister's face, he kind of calms down a bit. And he says, "Just show me what you were reading." And she says, and this is how strong these people were in their faith. She says, "You're impure. You have to go wash up first, and then maybe I'll let you." After getting smacked by, right? So he does so. He goes and he washes up, and he comes back and he reads the opening verses of Surah Taha, the chapter called Taha. Taha is one of the nicknames of the Prophet ﷺ. طه ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى إلا تذكرة لمن يخشى تنزيلا ممن خلق الأرض والسماوات العلى الرحمن على العرش استوى له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وما بينهما وما تحت الثرى. Right, and just these opening 5 verses of this, and his heart is completely changed, absolutely changed. And maybe I'll just you can look at the translation if you want to see why he was changed. He gets to the verse where "Innani ana Allah la ilaha ana fa'budni wa aqim as-salata li dhikri." That indeed I am Allah. Right? There is no God except for me. Worship me and establish the prayer for my remembrance. And immediately his heart changed. So he said to his sister, "Take me to the Prophet." Right? And they knew that something had changed, so they weren't threatened by that. So he went to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and he knocks on the door. And they were kind of hiding at this time. So one of the other companions who was inside the house looks through the crack in the door and says, "Uh-oh, Omar is there, and he's got a sword with him." So they told the Prophet, like, "Look, we don't know what he's about to do, what he's plotting here. Right? Maybe we shouldn't let him in." The Prophet said, "Open the door." Right? And this is one of the qualities of the Prophet was absolute courageousness. Right? Open the door. And Umar opens the door, and the Prophet ﷺ grabs him by his collar and says, "Is it not time for you to become Muslim?" Right? Someone as smart as you should not miss out on Islam. Right? And Umar said, "It's time." And he accepted Islam in that moment. And the entire city said, "Allahu Akbar." Right? Out of all of the Muslims shouted, "Allahu Akbar, Allah is the greatest." Why? Because of the strength of Umar, they were able to pray publicly now. No one would mess with them because they had Umar on their side. Right, so this is that Umar who is narrating this hadith. Right? And knowing who the narrator is gives great importance to the hadith itself, because now you have some historical background behind it. So Umar ibn al-Khattab, he narrates saying these words. He says, "One day while we were sitting with the Messenger of Allah, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam," that little Arabic thing there is called Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, so peace and blessings be upon him. And we try to say words of reverence like that for all of the prophets. He says, "A man suddenly appeared before us. He had extremely white clothing and extremely black hair. There were no traces of travel visible on him, and none of us knew him." Right? He joined his knees to his knees. I mean, he sat up against the Prophet ﷺ, so their 2 knees were together. Right? So he's facing him face to face, right, one-on-one. And he placed his hands on his thigh, so he's sitting like this. And we'll talk about all of this has meanings as well. And he said, "O Muhammad, inform me about Islam." All right. He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet replied, Islam is to testify that there is no God except Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. To establish the prayer, to give the zakat is the alms tax. If someone reaches a certain threshold of wealth, they would give that every 2.5% every year to the poor. To fast Ramadan and to perform the pilgrimage, the Hajj, to the sacred house, if one is able to do so. He said, meaning Gabriel, the angel, said, you have spoken the truth. So Omar, he says, we were amazed that he asked the question and verified that the answer was true. Like usually you ask somebody a question, they tell you the answer. You're like, okay, thank you for the answer. And he's like, no, you were right. It's almost like he was testing him. So he says, inform me about belief. So Gabriel asked the next question, inform me about belief, iman. He replied, it is to believe in Allah, His angels, His revelations, the last day, meaning the day of judgment, and to believe in destiny, the good and the evil of it, so the good and the bad of it. He said, you have spoken the truth. So again, he's confirming the answer. Gabriel then said, inform me about excellence, ihsan. Ihsan is the word in Arabic. He said, it is to worship Allah as though you see Him, and if you do not see Him, indeed He sees you. The man then said, you have spoken the truth. He then said, inform me about the final hour. Right? The Prophet replied, the one being asked is no more knowledgeable than the one asking. Right? And the scholars, they mentioned, the commentators on this, they mentioned this was out of humility, because Allah did reveal to him the knowledge of the day of judgment later on in his life. He said, then inform me of its signs. So he didn't answer that question. So he changed the question. He said, okay, instead of telling me about the day of judgment, tell me about the signs that precede the day of judgment. And he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that the bondswoman will gives birth to her master, and that you see barefoot, naked, poor shepherds competing and erecting lofty buildings. This in itself is an ocean. What in the world does that mean? The scholars had a field day. There's whole books and whole sciences built on those two answers. And the second one, the companions had no idea what was going on. The first one, they kind of had some guesses, and they're pretty close to what the scholars have derived as well. The second one is that you will see barefoot, naked, poor shepherds, right? Sheep herders, right? Shepherds, competing to erect lofty buildings. So this is before the discovery of oil in the Arabian Peninsula. So prior to that, they were Bedouins, right? Absolute Bedouins. And Woodrow Wilson, historical fact, Woodrow Wilson went to visit the Saudi king. I think at this time it was King Abdul Aziz at that time. And they had him in a tent in the middle of the desert, just waiting to be seen. Right? And he was waiting for an hour, 2 hours, just waiting by himself in this tent in the middle of the desert. And then King Abdul Aziz shows up very late, right? Intentionally. And he said, the reason why I did that, even though it is against our nature to do something like this to a guest, the reason why I did that is to let you know that we can go back to this way of life anytime we want. This is our home. We can live like this, right? But you cannot do that. You need our oil. You need you need the money that you get from us, right? We're desert Arabs. We can live in a desert, right? We just have some dates. We got one goat. We're good, right? And this is the reality, right? I've seen Bedouins, the most amazing people. They're just completely break all our paradigms of what comfort is. And just quick tangent. I don't like to make tangent, but the hadith is over. I usually wouldn't make a tangent in the middle of a hadith, but the hadith, that's the end of the hadith. So I'm in a taxi cab. All right, so context. I get to Yemen 2014, June 2014. About 3 months later, the war in the north started. So all the airports got closed. So the only way to leave Yemen was to drive 16 hours through the desert in a bus to Oman, the neighboring country. Right? Then you get into Oman. It's another hour to the airport there, and then you can fly from Salada to wherever you want. So So I'm on the way back. So this is coming back into Yemen, same process, but backwards. So I'm taking a taxi from the Omani border all the way to to the city of Tarim, where those scholars are buried and are living. So on the way, it's really common to pick up hitchhikers, right, in Yemen. It's not like a bad thing. It's like the norm. So there's this guy just walking down the street, and this is like probably like 10, 15 miles until you see any light sign of existence, right, of life. Like every 15 miles, there's like a checkpoint. So he's walking. So the taxi driver is like, do you mind if I pick up this guy? So this is what they do here. So, okay, do it. Right. So he gets in, and so they're talking in their local Yemeni slang, which I get a little bit of, but some of it escapes me. So we drive maybe like an hour in, right? The guy's like, stop here. I'm like, okay, maybe he's got to, there's no like rest stops out there. So he's got to stop. So he gets out, he gives salams and everything. And he gets out and he just starts walking. And I'm like, to the taxi driver, like, where's he going? He's like, he lives right there, just on the other side of those hills. His family lives there. There's like a series of tents and right behind the hills. It's amazing, absolutely amazing. What was that about? Okay, Bedouins, right? So the Saudi Arabia, including the Emirates, like, was prior to the discovery of oil, was like this. These were all Bedouin Arabs that lived in the middle of the desert, and they were sheep herders. Right? And they had very simple little clothing. They walked mostly barefoot or very thin sandals made out of like leather. And all of a sudden, they just became super rich overnight. And they started building things like the Burj Khalifa, right? The tallest building in the world, right? And it's just a complete break in the norm of society, because prior to that, there was no such thing as overnight success, overnight wealth, right? It was all generational wealth. Your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had 2 camels, right? And then those 2 camels made 10 camels. And then your great-grandfather inherited 100 camels, and now you got 1,000 camels. So you're rich, right? But that's generational wealth. You're kind of living in the wealth of those before it. No one became overnight sensations. Right? No one's like making money like that until oil. So this is one of the signs of the Day of Judgment. And there's many signs like this that weren't really understood at that time, but are much more understood now because of that. So this is the hadith of Gabriel. I wanted to, oh, sorry, there is a little part left. Stuff I wouldn't have done that if I realized that it wasn't over. Okay, question?
You said jump in. You said there was signs on the Day of Judgment. Minor sign and major sign. Is that a major sign?
So that is a minor sign, right? So the scholars, they mentioned that all the minor signs have already occurred, right? And even some of the middle level signs, but they will increase in intensity as the Day of Judgment gets closer and closer. The major signs have yet to come, like the return of Jesus, right? The Mahdi and the Antichrist and all those things. So there is actually a last part of the hadith. Apologies, I would not have made that tangent if we were still in the middle of the hadith. So the narrator, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he says, then he left, the strange person, right, who came out of nowhere. Right, he left, and I remained for some time. Right, he, the Prophet, said to me, "O Umar, do you know who the questioner was?" I said, "Allah and His Messenger know best." He said, "Indeed, it was the angel Gabriel, Gabriel in Arabic. Right, he came to teach you your religion, your deen." Right, we talked about that word in the first session. He came to teach you your deen, your religion. So because of this last statement, that all of those 4 questions were essentially done intentionally as a mode of teaching those who are listening, and then those who would eventually hear this hadith as it's transmitted to the rest of the people, the religion of Islam as a whole. Right? So all 4 of those questions are essentially parts of Islam. Right? The first question, right? What is Islam? What is Iman? What is Ihsan? What is practice? What is faith? And what is spiritual excellence? And then the signs of the Day of Judgment are also part of that. So these 4 kind of pillars, right, make up the total religion of Islam. And this is why this hadith is so important, because all of those 4 things have been served by the scholars throughout time and made into their own sciences. their own different sciences of Islam. Each of those questions we're going to talk about in later sessions. We want to just focus on the first part of the hadith, right? The strangeness of this situation that started this hadith off. So if maybe we can even just go back real quick to the first part. Okay, one day while we were sitting with the Messenger of Allah, a man suddenly appeared before us. Right? And these details are really important. So this is kind of the mindset that the scholars look at the hadith. Every word is important. Why did he say this word? Why did this happen? And this is how they derive such great wisdoms from these things. So he said he had extremely white clothing, important detail. Extremely black hair, another important detail. There's no traces of travel visible on him, another important detail, and none of us knew him. 4 things. And then how he sat, 5th thing, also important. Right. So first thing, extremely white clothing. Okay. What does that entail? One of the things is purity. Right. White is one of the. If you have any dirt on a white thobe, trust me, I know. Right. Any dirt on a white thobe, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Right. So having this idea of cleanliness is taken from this, and we'll see about the etiquettes of the seeker of knowledge. Right, that this all relates to this. In some Islamic seminaries, if you go there, there's a dress code. You have to wear white, all white, right? As a student of sacred knowledge. Some schools are a little bit more relaxed. The school that I first went to, you had to wear all white hat, white thobe, right? You cannot wear any colors. Right? Even like a scarf or something would have to be all white because of this hadith, right? Because he's coming and asking questions like a student-teacher relationship. Right, so as part of the etiquettes of the student, some of the scholars, they mention this. Extremely black hair indicates youth. So he would, right, that indicates youth. So when people, it is ideal for people to start studying early, right, as young as possible. And this is why people who are born into Muslim families have one up. Right? They have a huge benefit that they know about Allah and His Messenger from the beginning. They never had to taste the emptiness of disbelief, the emptiness of being without a connection with Allah. So extremely black hair. The next 2 is what I wanted to get to. There was no traces of travel visible on him, and none of us knew him. Those 2 go together. Okay, picture yourself. Absolute desert society. No running water, no electricity, right? No TikTok, right? All right, so this is, right? Right, this is like traditional. This is 1,400 years ago in the middle of the desert. Your buildings are made out of mud bricks baked in the sun, right? Maybe a palm leaf, right, roof, right, to stop the rain from coming in. There was no carpets in the mosque. The mosque was essentially dirt with some pebbles and rocks that you had to like move out of the way so you can make sajda, so you can prostrate. So this is that society. In the society is a very, very tribal society. Everybody knows everybody, right? So if there's a person that nobody knows, the only way that could be possible is that they traveled from somewhere else. And if they traveled from someone else in a white thobe, they are not coming up with a white thobe, right? They're going to have, like, at the best, if they're the most careful, a light beige, right? Maybe like a soft brown. Like, there's no way possible you can travel through the desert with a white thobe from somewhere else and come out at the end with a white thobe, right? So they're all digesting all of this in the moment, right? They see this guy, they're like, none of us know who he is, right? And his thobe is just shining. It's like, you got to have sunglasses. There's even, right? So extremely white clothing. It's not just regular white. It's extremely white clothing. So there was just mystery all around this person in the beginning, right? And this is really important because look at their etiquette. Right? They didn't just like, oh my God, who is this guy? Who are you? They didn't do that. They were in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, right? In his presence, they were very, very, very calm demeanored. They were very, they held themselves with great comportment in his presence, ﷺ. Even when he would speak, they would say, كَأَنَّ عَلَى رُؤُوسِهِمُ الطَّيْرِ. It was as if birds were perched on their heads. They did not move. right, in his presence, out of their love and their reverence for him, not because he asked for it. Right? He didn't want any of that. They wouldn't have a gathering like this, right? They would sit in such a way that a visitor wouldn't know who the prophet was. There was no distinction. There was no chair. There was no. So it wasn't because he told them to act that way. It's because they're just being in his awe-inspiring presence and just the immensity of what it means to be in the presence of the greatest of Allah's creation, the final prophet. Imagine being in the presence of Jesus, right? You're not going to be like you normally are. You're just by nature, not because he's going to ask you to do that, but by nature, you're going to have this extra level of attentiveness of everything he says. You're going to hang on every word that he says, or you're going to be focused on everything about him. So this person comes in, they notice this person, but they're not distracted from the prophet, right? So they're not going to like, hold on, prophet, who are you? They're not going to do that. So they're waiting. They're seeing this going on. And then the way he sits. So if we go back to this side. So from this hadith, two things are mainly taken. One is the etiquettes of the seeker of knowledge. Right? If someone is seeking sacred knowledge, which all of you are doing, right? The Prophet said that whoever leaves their house in search of sacred knowledge, then they are in the path of Allah until they return. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that من طلب العلم ليحيي به الإسلام ثم أدركه الموت, right? فليس بينه وبين نبي إلا درجة واحدة. That if a person goes out from their home in search of sacred knowledge, the knowledge that goes back to Allah and His Messenger, right? And they die in the process. They die on their way there. Then on the day of judgment, there's between them and the prophets themselves, there's only one rank difference. There's only one rank difference because of the magnitude of what they're seeking. Right? So sacred knowledge is, and there's a reason why the first revelation is read. Right? Knowledge is at the center of this. And which was very radically different before, because for the Quraysh, the tribe of the Prophet, most of them were polytheists, right? They were pagans. They worshipped idols. And so the only monotheists around were the Jews that lived in the north. So the Jews, only the rabbis had knowledge, and only the rabbis read the books. Right? The lay people, the common people just asked questions. They couldn't read the book themselves. Right? It just wasn't the way to do it. Similar in the Catholicism was similar to that you would just go to the leader of the church and you would ask your questions, but direct. And this is why Martin Luther kind of went rogue, because he was like, why can't I read the Bible? Right? And then you have the Protestants that are kind of born out of that. But the Quran is saying, no, you should learn everything. Learn how to read the Quran. Learn how to study the Quran. Learn what the Arabic means. Right? Learn for yourself. Connect yourself to these chains. Right? Ask questions. Ask as many questions as you can. So etiquettes of seeking knowledge. Right? We have the clothing. Right? So the most schools don't require you to wear white. But the idea of having dignified and cleanly clothes and stuff as one is seeking, right? Instead of right now during COVID, you got like online classes, and you can tell my man is in pajamas. You can tell he's got like a thobe on the top, pajamas on the bottom, right? Just rolled out of bed. So that is between them and Allah. Like we might not know, but according to the reverence that we show these things is the amount that we're going to get from it. Because there's an outward component, which is like actually reading and doing the study and revising and doing the effort, but there's an inward component as well, that there's a gifted knowledge to those who are really sincere and those who show the utmost reverence for these things. The second was travel, to travel for the sake of knowledge. Right? So we have a person in this hadith, Gabriel is not from there. He traveled to the Prophet ﷺ to ask these questions. And we talked about Imam Bukhari, who traveled 40 days just to find one hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Traveling for the sake of knowledge is one of the most, one of the greatest acts of worship that one could do. Even though the scholars, they do recommend to use up all of the resources you have locally first. Right? So you don't want to just be like, okay, I'm out, right? And you might have one of the greatest scholars down the street from your house, right? Or in a local masjid, and you're traveling to the other side of the world to get what you could have gotten at home, right? So it's ideal to use up the resources that one has, study as much as you can locally, right? And then if you've kind of reached the pinnacle of what you could acquire locally, then, right, then you set sails, or metaphorically, to other places, right? And one of the great Shafi'i scholars, Ibn Ruslan, he wrote in a poem, ومن لم يكن يعلم ذا فليسأل من لم يجد معلما فليرحل. That whoever doesn't know, they should ask, and whoever can't find a teacher, let them travel, right? And this was when I became Muslim, this was the only way to get knowledge, right? There was I mentioned that YouTube was just now starting, but really there was not much local, right? So you had to kind of travel. Even prior to that, in the 90s, those who became Muslim before that, you find that many of the scholars of today that we all know their names of, like Sheikh Hamza, like Sheikh Yahya Rodis, like these, most of them were from the Bay Area in Canada and California. And we have some people here originally from California, that they had to travel. Like one of our co-teachers at Al-Maqasid, Sheikh Yahya, who's the founding director, he, as a white American convert in the 90s, he traveled to West Africa and lived with desert Arabs, like the real desert. Like in Yemen, we had mud brick houses, yes, but we also had Doritos and Wi-Fi, right? He literally lived in a tent, right? And you had to get on a donkey, go a mile, fill up a bucket of water, and that was the water you used to wash your dishes, to make wudu, to bathe, to wash your clothes. That same bucket of water was your daily water. Like that's where he had to travel, because there was not much then. There was not much available then. Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of resources now, right? And the internet is really hard to sift through, because, right, if you search something on Google, you're going to get all kinds of things that don't have a chain of transmission. And then you might get some things that do. And it's hard to sift that, but we have a lot of resources. We have a whole table full of books. These books were not there back then, right? The Islamic Place, I think it's called Islamic Place, right? The bookstore. Yeah, that was there with the children's music playing on rotation. Ramadan, right? That was there, but even like the prints that they had were like this old, like yellow prints with like half the words were not even really translated. A lot of like transliterations that were really hard. So it wasn't really accessible at that time. So travel was really the only way to get knowledge in the past. But now there's so many resources, right? A person could do a whole curriculum study from their home online, right? So in one way that makes it easier. In another way, we don't have an excuse, right? So ignorance is not an excuse on the day of judgment. Because the Prophet said that seeking sacred knowledge is an obligation on every Muslim, but only to the extent that they need to be able to practice what's required of them. They don't need to go really deep. It's not even an obligation to learn Arabic, essentially, right? Only to memorize some of the chapters for prayer. But a certain level of knowledge is an obligation. Tamam. So that's one of the things that they derive. The etiquettes of seeking sacred knowledge, right? And that's its own thing. We can go very deep into that. The scholars before us showed the utmost reverence for sacred knowledge, especially when it comes to the Quran, and especially when it comes to the prophetic hadith, the narrations of the Prophet. Imam Malik, one of the great scholars who we'll talk about today, whenever he would recite, whenever somebody would come knock on his door and ask a question that related to the sacred law, right, he would open the door and he would answer their question. Whenever anyone had a question about the prophetic hadith, he would go and take a shower, he would bathe, he would put on his turban, his best clothes, he would put on perfume, he would burn incense, and then invite them in, and then he would narrate the hadith. Right? This is the level of reverence that they had. That he was in a session where he was teaching hadith, and in the middle of the hadith, his face began to turn red, and he started to kind of shake a little bit, but he continued. And when he finished the hadith, he closed the book and he said to a student, "Please help me. I think there's a scorpion on my back." Right? And he was being bit while reciting this hadith, but he did not want to interrupt the hadith until it was finished. right? And this is the level of honor that they showed. This partially because of who their realization and understanding of who the Prophet is, right, and who Allah is. But also because of their reference, Allah unveiled to them a lot deeper meanings. Right, so it's a two-way road. And then the four questions in the hadith are the second most important part of this hadith. Each one of those questions itself is its own lecture. So we read all of this. I just wanted to explain it before we ran. So clothing, age, traveling for knowledge, sitting style. Or the school that I went to, we had to sit in tashahhud, right? So the way you would sit at the end of the prayer on your knees, we had to sit like that in class. They made a little concession for me. I was 24, and they were all like 14, like rubbery bones. I was 24, and I'm a convert, so I was sitting on couches and chairs my whole life. You only sat on the floor when you're like on camping trip or something. They called it Indian style. Another politically incorrect term. But yeah, sitting on the floor was really hard. In Bangladesh, to your question, they told me, don't worry, brother, you'll get used to it. 15 years later, I'm still squirming. I don't know if you all see the videos from Maqasid, like the Mawlid. The Mawlid is like an hour and a half. It's like a gathering. And probably an hour and a half, I'm doing like 3 different positions. Right, so they gave me a concession, but they would require the students to sit in tashahhud, sit in that position, because that's the position Gabriel sat, Angel Gabriel sat when he learning from the Prophet ﷺ, right? And all of it is really, it's not about the outward thing, it's about the reverence that manifests, that portrays. And then those are the 4 questions, right? What is Islam? What is belief? What is Iman in Arabic? What is excellence? And then the signs of the Day of Judgment. So we wanted to keep this a little bit light just because the first session was a bit heavy. I think I went drastically over time, and food is coming. So if anyone wants to say anything or questions or comments or criticisms or critiques or anything, ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaba.